But given that we're in stage 3 now, and cities like Melbourne have learned you can get back into lockdown very quickly. You're just away from that happening. We have an epidemiologist who's going to share what you need to know, what you may have forgotten, what you might not be sure about with us right now. He's an epidemiologist and science communicator, and he is Dr. Raywat Deonandan. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. How are you?
I am feeling kind of good. The sun is out. Great. That immediately makes me feel better. I see people walking outside. It gives you this sense of everything is okay, which also means it's easy to forget the measures that you need to do. It's hard to
believe, how to remember back in March and we're all petrified at home, not seeing another human being, but now people are all around us. It's almost normal.
Well, and this is the thing I've seen. I've seen it get very lax, actually. I've been out on patios, and I've seen how people will talk with strangers and people will approach each other. And part of it might be, when I drink alcohol, suddenly I'm eating food that I wouldn't let myself eat when I'm sober. And maybe, you're taking actions that you wouldn't necessarily allow yourself to do when you're drinking alcohol. So I thought we could revisit some things with you today. And just before you joined us, I saw this piece of news that was released from the CDC, and it was talking about 2 hairstylists in Springfield who developed COVID symptoms. They kept working for days anyway, serving 139 customers while they were symptomatic. But the CDC is saying none of these people were infected because they think it's because the hairstylists were wearing masks.
Yeah, I cite that story all the time. It's what we call a strong statistical signal. It's not, the best kind of evidence, but it's really quite compelling. So it suggests to me that mask wearing really works well as what we call a source transmission mitigator. So it's not that great at protecting the wearer against infection, but it's pretty good at preventing the wearer from spreading the infection to other people. That's what's happened here in this example.
Can you tell me how to stop the spread of infection of masks causing pimples on my face constantly? This is happening a lot.
Yeah, I've seen some interesting products advertised on Facebook and other places.
Oh, no.
Where the mask is held a little bit beyond your face. Mm-hmm. And certainly face shields are a good addition. It's a bit controversial. I've had some online arguments about this. I'm a big lover of face shields. There are some people who feel, with some evidence, that face shields don't mitigate the outward transmission as well as masks do. But I've seen some good designs for face shields that wrap around the chin a bit better, and that will probably do the job. So in the long run, if this is with us for many months, as it might be, I think we might see a transition to the shield-wearing kind of approach as it's more amenable to makeup and human communication.
Yeah, but I don't know how amenable it will be to the ice in the winter. We're going to need de-icer for it as well, probably.
That's a really good point. I hadn't thought of that.
I'm sorry that I even had to make it. I try avoid saying the S word and I word on my show. I'm Dahlia, this is The Goods, and we're with Dr. Raywat Deonandan right now. He's an epidemiologist, and I want to get to some of these questions. I do have some key questions. I know there are some things we should focus on before I get to those. But when it comes to reopening school in the fall, we open bars, and that seems to be okay, but it's a very big question. It's a contentious issue for many people. Should kids go back to school? What are your thoughts on what this will be like when it comes to infection and opportunity for the virus to spread?
I think, first of all, getting schools open full-time in the fall should be our number one priority as a society right now. And anything that distracts us from that goal is probably a waste of time. So I understand parents' frustration that why are we spending all this time and effort opening up bars when the schools remain closed? I get that, and I agree with that, actually. But I will say that what we learn about how we open up bars now can be used in how we deploy our resources in the fall. Now, what's the risk for children in the fall? Well, children we know do get the disease, and they do spread the disease, and they can actually die of the disease. It's just less likely for them. And with a large number of kids every day clustering in large groups, the probability of that happening increases. Children also encounter a lot more people during the day than adults do. We see, 5, 10 people during the week. Kids see 30, 40, even 100 people during the week. So they're more likely to acquire things, more likely to pass things on. The best way to keep kids safe, and the best way to open schools safely is to keep the caseload in the community as low as we can. If it's not around us, it can't get into schools. That's why maybe opening up a lot of new businesses too early is not a great idea if it impedes our ability to open schools in the fall.
Okay. So I just want to keep pouring through different questions that I have rather than doing follow-ups, because then I'll never have time to get to all of these questions. When we're talking about how COVID can spread and where the germs of it might spread, there's a lot of issues right now. I mean, I see a touchless society in our future. If you are an engineer when it comes to making anything touchless, you have struck gold in life right now. But if somebody, for instance, we have a table in front of us and somebody has the COVID germs and they touch that table and those germs somehow get on the table, is it going to be on that one spot where those germs are, or can the germs now spread across the entire table?
Interesting question. First of all, there are many ways that viruses spread, and the manner which you've described is called a fomite transmission, F-O-M-I-T-E, that's surface transmission. This disease doesn't seem to be really well situated in the fomite realm, meaning most people don't get it from touching surfaces, but it's possible. So if someone sneezes on a table, it's going to stay there until the virus dies. Now, if someone touches that table, then touches a doorknob, they might have moved it to the doorknob. Might have, but the probability is low. Then someone else can touch that doorknob and touch their face, and then from their face it gets into their bodies. This is possible. It's shown experimentally to be true. It just has not been observed, to my knowledge, in the real world yet. I would not be overly concerned about touching surfaces. However, as a new normal unrolls, we should avoid touching things we shouldn't have to touch. We should avoid touching other people, and we should avoid touching our face. These things, incrementally, when scaled up to a large population, will show great dividends. But as individuals, our risk of infection is pretty low when it comes to the surfaces.
Well, I see so many people, me included, for instance, and I think when I do this that I'm being absolutely ridiculous, but elevator buttons in my condo, I'll press with my key. But then that key, I end up touching, it's in my pocket, it's in my hand, I handle it, and I see people using their shirts to press elevator buttons or those sorts of things, but you're still effectively, you're going to touch what's on your body, or you're going to touch that key, or there are keys that you can purchase, which you can actually spend extra money on these items, and you use that key to touch whatever you want to touch, and then you put it back in your pocket as you're handling it. Are any of these effective ways to prevent yourself from touching anything that could have COVID on it?
I mentioned that we have no evidence that anyone's ever got it from touching the surface. There's a couple of interesting cases where someone might have got it from touching an elevator button, maybe. So having the primary source being a surface that someone else has sneezed on is probably more likely. It's very low likely, but it's more likely than having your keys touching the button, then touching your pocket, then you touching your pocket, then touching your face. Every time it transfers from one surface to another, the viral load diminishes substantially. So by the time you're on 2 or 3 surfaces, it's vanishingly small. I would not worry about this at all. I think it's wise to avoid touching elevator buttons and doorknobs and things like that, and then touching your face. So just avoid touching your face and wash your hands frequently throughout the day, and you're fine.
What about mosquitoes? Can they transmit this?
Very good question. No. So we call that vector transmission, and there is zero evidence that this is a vector-transmitted disease. I would not worry about that at all.
Okay, so we're done with mosquitoes, and then the fomite aspects of this are not very strong. I just wanted to say the word fomite because I could say vector, I could say either. I feel very educated right now with Dr. Deonandan, but here's the other thing I wonder, and the first day when we discovered that we were put into lockdown, I had a show, and my question was, do you ever think handshakes will come back as a cultural norm? I still don't think they will. How do you feel about handshakes compared to hugs and handshakes overall? What are your thoughts on them?
It's funny because hugs are possibly more dangerous because your faces are close together, and if it's a prolonged hug and you're facing each other and breathing on each other, it's a little more dangerous than touching someone's hand and avoiding touching your face afterwards. But Asian cultures don't use handshakes, and there are a variety of reasons for that historically. And with our cultural shift happening now and a more globalized cultural approach to things, I suspect that handshakes will be diminished in our society somewhat. I think they'll still linger in many cases. It's a hard thing to shake in the corporate boardrooms, not that I would know, never having been in a corporate boardroom. But I would not be surprised if this vanishes from our way of doing things. And maybe it should vanish, because touching people is icky.
Says the epidemiologist. Well, looking at the typical activities that we'll do in a day and the way that people are approaching COVID, I wonder, a day in the life of an epidemiologist now, how it's changed in terms of the precautions that you take that other people might not, and the things that you'll do that other people right now might seem too scared to do. How do you see this?
Well, I'm a special case because my spouse is a physician who has a much lower tolerance of risk of these matters than I do. And so in the heat of the pandemic, we were leaving our Amazon boxes outside for a couple of days before opening them. Same with the mail. We wiped down all our groceries. She was very adamant that I not touch anything outside the house. And then touch something inside the house. We have a decontamination zone in the house, all that stuff. That's overstepping it. I understand that early on we didn't understand what the transmission dynamics were, so we had to take these extra steps. But now I'm pretty lax in those matters. The way I look at it is, you get this disease from other people, not things. It's not floating around in the park. It's floating around people who are infected. So if you can avoid unnecessary intimate contact with people you do not know well, then you're probably fine. Right? So, and do not be afraid of people. Let's not panic. Let's not make this an antisocial society. Let's understand that a very small fraction of people in our community have this disease and are therefore infectious. Therefore, everyone should behave as if the disease is prevalent amongst most people and just avoid intimate contact. It's as simple as that.
Last question for you, sir. I know that dogs can't spread COVID-19, but I'm walking down the street, and I can't walk down the street without people asking me if they could pet my Fozzie bear. And typically, I don't want somebody whom I don't know touching him anyway to begin with. But right now, if I see somebody like the darling little girl who wasn't able to pet him the other day, named Louise, but she wrote down his name instead in a notebook so she'd never forget him. It was the sweetest little exchange. Oh, wow. I know, it was so cute. Should I have let Louise pet Fozzie bear? Would anything happen to anybody if there were any COVID anywhere? Like if, let's say she had COVID, she pets him. Now her hands had whatever germs. She rubs his fur. Later, I'm petting him. Does this affect anybody in any way?
It's theoretically possible, but again, this has never been observed to happen. Also, the extent to which the virus can live on surfaces is really dependent upon the nature of the surface. It seems to love hard surfaces like steel. It hates soft surfaces like fabric and fur. So touching a dog, let's say that the person's hand is actually infectious. They touch the fur and a little bit gets on the fur. It's not going to last very long. It doesn't like fur. And so if it's a half hour, an hour, a couple hours before someone else touches it, it's really unlikely that if they do get a dose, it'll be a living dose. I think the risk is vanishingly small. I let everyone touch my dog. Which makes my spouse very upset. But
So what you're saying is that the people whom I like or feel comfortable around, like little Louise, I can let her touch my dog, and the people whom I'm scared of, I can pretend like I think that you can easily get COVID and it's dangerous, and so let's not touch the doggy.
You can leverage COVID panic to satisfy whatever
people are doing that, aren't they? That has been a thing, leveraging COVID panic. I think that you just coined something right there. Well, thank you so much. This has been actually very insightful. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Is there a website where you think people can get the best information when they're looking for something about the question on COVID-19? Because everybody is just using the most interesting unknown websites as their main sources of information.
Oh, this has been a pandemic of misinformation more than anything else. And the safest place to go is the public health website, the Ottawa Public Health website. They tend to err on the side of caution more so than they need to oftentimes, but that's the most sober source of information locally. And the university websites like Johns Hopkins universities and so forth. Just avoid YouTube. Don't get your information from YouTube.
Avoid YouTube, and if I don't like you, then you're not touching my puppy because COVID. And if I like you, it's no problem. You could touch him. Dr. Ray Deonandan, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I hope you and your wife stay safe. I hope you stay safe from your wife. Don't get her angry at you. I'm Dahlia. This is The Goods. And just ahead, Ottawa's ultimate drag queen on drag's digital revolution in the pandemic world. And before the end of the show, from Arrested Development, Speech is going to join us. This